Greetings, everyone. Brad here with Mild Mannered EDC. Today we're going to look at a Kizer knife, the Kizer Kobold. There you go. Interesting knife, particularly in looks. Action, too, is pretty interesting, and we'll talk about all those things here in a minute, but I wanted to kind of give you a good sense of what we're looking at here. This is a knife that I believe is new from Kizer here in 2020. And I don't know exactly when it came out this year, but it did. And I know we're in the waning days here of 2020, but, you know, whatever, it still counts. But yeah, so this is an interesting knife, and I wanted to pick it up because of its looks in particular. And I'm kind of a Kizer fan, right? Particularly Kizer of old, and I think they're sort of coming back to... They sort of seem to have had a rough patch, and they're sort of coming back into their own here a little bit. So I'm liking what I'm seeing there. So this is what we got. This particular knife is designed by an individual named Sebastian Irawan, and he is based out of Indonesia. I believe he's on Instagram, if you want to look him up. Interesting knives. He's got some interesting designs. As you can see, he's kind of his own take on some things. And yeah, I like it. I think it's pretty cool that Kizer went with a collaboration with him, and they produced this knife. So there you go. So we'll talk some specs, then we'll do a couple of size comparisons, and then get underway with our classic mild-mannered review. Before we do that, just a quick mention here. This is a $150 knife. That's about what I paid for it. Just want to get that out of the way because I know a lot of people just want to know the price on some of these knives, and it can kind of help give them some sense of what they're liking or disliking as they go through with the review. So there you go. And also, thank you if you're new to the channel and checking this out. Really appreciate it. Consider subscribing. And for those of you that are always supporting the channel and have been subscribed either for a little while or a long while, thank you very much. I really do appreciate it. It means a lot. It really does, especially in a year that's been tough for... You know, a lot of people. It's been really fun to connect and be able to affirm kind of, you know, there's a lot of goodness out there in the world, and you all are a big part of that for me. So thank you very much. Okay, now let's get on to the knife, shall we? All right, so specs. We've got a blade length here of 2.94 inches. We've got a blade thickness of 0.11 inches. We've got a handle length, when it's all closed up, of 4.125 inches. We got a handle thickness stated online of 0.50, so a half an inch. That felt thick to me when I got this, so I looked it up with checked it out with my calipers, and sure enough, it is a little smaller than that. It's about 0.45, pretty much throughout. So there you go. Just in case you're seeing that online, this isn't quite a half an inch thick. So there you go. Overall, tip to tail, when it's all opened up, we've got a 7.09 inch knife with a weight of 3.07 ounces. So a lot of this very much in the wheelhouse here for a knife that I like in terms of sort of the mild-mannered specs out there. So there you go. How about a couple of quick size comparisons? Let's do a classic Swiss Army knife. There you go. I know my size comparisons, sometimes people complain because of the perspective of my camera here, but I still think you can get a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about here. How about a Spyderco Capara? There you go. And then we'll do one more. How about a Kershaw Dividend, which is fairly similar in terms of size. Okay, now, classic mild-mannered review. When we do a classic mild-mannered review, we talk blade, then action, scales and hardware, and then ergos and carry. So let's go ahead and get underway with the blade on this particular Kobold. So, very interesting blade shape, right? That's sort of the first thing that strikes you, or at least the first thing that sort of struck me. You've got this sort of upswept style blade, or upswept cutting edge, which I think is interesting. And then you definitely have what, you know, I guess technically, right, a drop point. Is this a clip point? A cascading drop point? I don't know. I mean, I'm just, you know, making up terms, I guess, at this point. But interesting nonetheless. And I like to see that it looks a little different. It's not just sort of your classic, you know, drop point or spear point kind of looking knife. So I think that's pretty cool. So overall, that's what you've got. Now you do have a flat ground S35VN steel blade. Let's see. There you go. S35VN. Kizer loves S35VN, and there you go. So that's what you've got on this blade. Now you do have sort of a satin finish. Some parts are a little more polished, some are a little more brushed, but that's what you've got there. And everything, though, is quite well chamfered. Everything from the opening hole to, you know, the spine and the crown here on the blade. I mean, it's all just done very, very nice in terms of the chamfering on the blade. Now you also have and as well, as I mentioned there on the opening hole. Now you've got a nicely done sharpening choil and a very even grind. It's not the thinnest behind the edge, but it's pretty darn thin and pretty darn slicey, so it's hard to complain. But overall, as I'm doing this more and more, and as I'm getting deeper into the hobby, even grinds are becoming more and more of something I'm looking for when I look for a quality knife, whether it's custom or production. Just taking the time to actually do a grind right. It's not as common as you might think. And so for me, that's just one of my own little nitpicks that I've been looking at more and more these days. And this one's done very well. So there you go. So that's what we've got here with the blade. I like it. Cool blade. Does the job. Not much more to say about that. Oh, I did want to mention the maker's mark here for Sebastian Irawan. I think that's a cool little maker's mark. It's like a little reversed folding pocket knifey kind of thing. I think that's kind of cool. So there you go. And then you got the name here, Kobold. So there you go. That's what we got here with blade. Now, let's talk action. There we go. So there is, really primarily one way to open the knife, and that is to flick it open. There you go, like that. Doing it under the camera, I'm impressed I did that without messing it up. So, that's kind of the primary thing. It's pretty darn easy to do. So the action itself is quite smooth, running on ball bearings. It is quite smooth. There's nothing to argue with there. You can see, it's got a really nice action and in a typical sort of Kizer action, I think, in a lot of ways. So, a little wrist goes a long way with it, I think, just to kind of add, especially if you're not great at flicking. I'm not one of the best. So there you go. And, depending on your finger size and stuff like that, this may actually be, not necessarily ideal. I don't know. There is another way that Kizer says you can open this knife, and I'll see if I can do this without looking like a total fool here. But basically, and it's interesting, you've got this sort of landing pad right back here without a flipper. So I don't really know why they did that, but in theory, you're able to sort of push down on this and then flick it open. And when you push down on this, you should be able to sort of overcome the detent. Let's see if I can do that. Let's see. There you go. And then you just sort of flick it open. That seems really, really impractical to me. You certainly can do it. I don't know if that's how you would want to do that every time you take it out of your pocket, but it's what they're calling sort of the secret way of opening the Kobold.
But don't worry. Your secret is safe with me.
I don't know. You be the judge. There you go. I think the flick open works just fine for me. So there you go. That's kind of what you got here with action in terms of it being smooth, easy to operate, doing what you're supposed to or sort of want it to do from a knife that you go into it knowing is a flick open sort of only knife, even though it's got this other secret way, which yeah. All right. It is a titanium frame lock. So you can see that there. It does have an over travel stop, and there you go. A little bit of a lock bar insert, which is very, very nice. All nice touches, and you like to see those on knives more and more these days. So it came nice and centered, remains centered, no issues there. And obviously no blade play, no blade rock at all. So very, very, well built and what I generally would expect from Kizer across the board. So there you go. That's what we've got here with this particular knife in terms of action. Now, scales and hardware, interestingly. So, right, it's titanium scales. It's got some milling, which I think is pretty cool. Some pretty nice milling. Kind of some weird design elements, and we'll talk about those a little bit more in Ergos and Carry. And then you've got this, what essentially is a sort of plastic sticker carbon fiber. Is it real carbon fiber? Probably, but it looks like that stuff that sort of Spyderco uses or a couple other, it's not this, right? It's not this type of carbon fiber. It's that more stickery type of carbon fiber. Maybe that bothers you. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I'm kind of neither here nor there on it. It's not entirely perfectly flush with the titanium, so that's a little bit of a downer for me. I would have liked to have seen that, especially since it's a sticker. You just have to barely do an inlay there and put the sticker in. So I would have liked to have seen that. It's much better kind of down here than it is up here. But anyways, that's sort of what you got there. But it does kind of break it up a little bit and sort of break up the monotony of sort of the classic just gray titanium type knife. So, and it is only here on the show side, not on the clip side. And speaking of clips, there we go. You have a milled titanium clip, which actually is quite good. I like the fact that it's sort of canted. It's designed in a way to sort of minimize hot spots, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in Ergos and Carry. But by and large, it's it's a good clip. It's got some good spring to it. It's a nice titanium milled clip, so nothing to complain about there. And then you've got your classic sort of Kizer hardware, right? Just sort of plain stainless steel hardware in the pivots and screws. So that's what we've got. Oh, and I'm sorry, and you do have this titanium backspacer here, which is done nicely and flush with the knife, which I guess this part of it, right, is your lanyard loop. But whatever. There you go. So that's what we kind of got here with scales and hardware. Now, ergos and carry. This may be the most kind of, I don't know. I was going to say controversial, but there's nothing controversial here. It's the part of the knife that I kind of go back and forth on the most, and that is the ergos. The biggest thing for me with the ergos is right here. These cutouts make for a little bit of a sharp, and it's not sharp, but it's a little pokey, right? So when you're holding this in your hand, as you're wont to do when you open a knife, even whether you're flicking it or using a flipper tab, I don't know. It's a little funky. Additionally, now I can get 4 fingers on here, no problem. But when you're pressing down, you do get a little of this just sort of right in the palm. And you can kind of see the marks there. So depending on how hard you bear down on it or whatever, you are going to get a little of that. So just be prepared. Is it the end of anything? No, but it is there. And it's a little bit of a hot spot. And I think, and I've said before, hot spots and sort of ergo issues can definitely be subjective. And I think this is, no different than that. But I would argue that this is probably going to have a legitimate hotspot for most people off of the back of this little backspacer here. So, it's a little bit of form over function, right? The design is there. It looks cool. Is it really needed, and did it do the job in terms of providing this sort of massive lanyard hole and a bit of a hotspot? So a little bit of a downer there. The rest of the knife, though, in terms of sort of carry or ergos rather, is quite good. Your hand, if your hand fits nicely, it's you got a little bit of jimping here on the top, which I said was a little bit on the aesthetics only side, but it's still there. Feels good. You are able to choke up just a tad using this sort of flat space down here. So if you want to do that, you can. So, overall, it's not terrible. It does have a couple of ergo fouls, I think, but by and large, it's done pretty well. There aren't too many sharp spots or anything like that. As I mentioned, it's pretty well done in terms of chamfering and all that. These parts can be a little pokey kind of up here, but again, pushing on them does that. In just normal use and carry, I didn't really notice it that much. So, take it for what it is, but that's where I'd sit sort of with ergos. It's a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of ergos. Now, carry, I had no problems with this in carry. It's very slim. It's relatively lightweight. As I mentioned, it's got a nice pocket clip. It's pretty straight and compact. I think from a carry standpoint, this thing works pretty darn well. It's not super deep, but it's also not super shallow. As you can see here, we'll put it in here. There you go. So you got a little bit sticking up, and you're able to pull that out if you want, or if you're using, like I said, that lanyard or whatever people are doing. But I like how the clip is sort of pushed into this. And anyways, it's overall, it's pretty darn good. So carry was definitely something that I gave it some high marks on. So that's what we've got. I mean, by and large, there's a lot that I like about this knife. I think it's interesting. I really enjoy kind of getting to see a new designer that, at least for me, that I wasn't aware of, and seeing his design work and being able to learn a little bit more about him, and seeing Kizer, working with those kind of folks, I think is pretty cool. So I'm glad to see that. I think this is a unique knife. It's interesting. Will it stick around? It won't, but I do believe that it's not going to, because I owe this to, I am sending this to a buddy of mine who I think will be surprised to get it, and I'll see what he thinks about it. So it's not going to be sticking around for me, but it is on its way out the door. And it's an interesting knife, and I hope he likes it, or at least finds it as interesting as I did. Likewise, I hope you found it interesting. And most importantly, thanks for stopping by and checking out this review. Please, be kind to each other. Be mild-mannered to one another. Be safe out there. And all the best.